Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, Mr. Ted Brady, who is here with us today to tell us a little bit about how the COVID Relief Fund money of the Economic Recovery Grant is going, how that process is working, and maybe a few more general observations about Vermont's economy at the present moment and going forward. Mr. Brady, thank you very much for making the time available to talk with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andrew.
Just to kind of get us started, I wondered if you could give us an update on how things are going with the economic relief grants that your agency and the tax department announced, what was it, a week ago last Monday. I know there's a lot of anticipation around that, and I'm sure a lot of firms and businesses around the state had all their paperwork ready to sign in at 8 o'clock that morning, I think. So how many applications did you all get so far?
Sure. So since launching the $150 million Economic Recovery Grant Program last Monday, the Agency of Commerce and the Department of Tax have received more than 2,500 applications from 2,500 businesses of all different stripes, everything from landscapers to hotels to restaurants and everything in between. It's been, the system's worked. We've received the applications. We're in the process of reviewing the applications, making approvals on a daily basis. And we found that the need is overwhelming, certainly, but we're able to keep up with it. And the $150 million, there's still funding left. So I'd encourage anybody whose business has suffered a 50% or greater loss in any single month since this crisis started to go to accd.vermont.gov and check out the Emergency Recovery Grant section and see if it's something that might apply to you.
So that portal is still open then. If a business, large or small, wants to try to take advantage of this opportunity, they could still submit an application.
Yep, we've received applications for a little more than half of the funding that's available. So I don't want to pretend like this funding will be available for a long time, but right now it's not too late to get in line. And both the Agency of Commerce and the Department of Taxes are operating on a first-come, first-served basis. So if you were waiting for one reason, maybe you wanted to file your 2019 taxes, and July 15th was the deadline. Maybe you're waiting for those taxes to be filed, and that's why you were going to apply. Or maybe you thought you'd have another month of loss to demonstrate your loss. I'm telling you, if you've had a 50% or greater loss in any single month, you should apply now. You don't need to wait until you have a 75% loss or something greater. Come on in and get that application underway. We want to make sure that your business has a fighting chance to recover from the crisis.
So what in general is your sense of how the Vermont economy has been impacted by the COVID crisis and pandemic? I mean, obviously it's been universal. I mean, virtually every sector has been impacted in some way or another, some more than others. But what's the 30,000-foot takeaway so far on who's, let's say, struggling the most, and who, from your perspective, seems to be coping the best?
Well, I think the bigger picture is our staff did an analysis of the economy, and at the height of the crisis during April and May, when things were completely shut down at one point, it was costing the state of Vermont $1 billion a year. Now, $1 billion a month, I apologize. Put that in perspective, we have about a $30 billion gross domestic state product. So when you think about that, that's a rather sizable dent in our economy. That's not to say it's 1 billion of 30 billion. That's economic activity. It's a little different, not apples to apples, but it puts it in perspective for you. That's a month. Then you look at the number of unemployed. And, at the height of our crisis, there were 100,000 people who were filing for unemployment on a weekly basis. Today, that number is down to tens of thousands. That's certainly a step in the right direction, but it's still an astronomically high number of people who are on unemployment. Here we are 4 months after the start of the crisis. So it's fair to say that the economic impact is still far-reaching. It's still catastrophic. And when you look at the impact that has on our state coffers and what it's going to do to school budgets, town budgets, the state budget, services that the state can provide, next 2 years, economists are saying it's a $300 million hit on our $1.6 billion budget, or sorry, $6 billion budget, but when you took general fund and things like this, it's a little different. It's an enormous hit, and to carve $300 million out of the state's budget is going to be hard. What we at the Agency of Commerce recognize is the only way to overcome this crisis and the economic crisis and make sure that we have the funding available to rebound and provide the services the state needs to is by making sure our businesses are still contributing taxpayers. And right now, we're really concerned that these businesses that have been pinched, these businesses that have had to close, these businesses that have had to tell their employees that they don't have work for them right now, we're worried they're not going to be able to come back. And if they don't come back, that 300 million exponentially grows, because you think, look at meals and rooms tax, right? This enormous revenue sector for revenue piece of our pie comes from our hotels and our tourism industry. Well, when you have a hotel that's closed for 3 months or for 2 months and then able to open at 50%, there's not a viable business model there. And most of these mom and pop operations, the bed and breakfasts, the family-run lodging properties, they're not sitting on a pile of cash. They're not making large profit margins each year. They have a good business model, but it can't withstand a lost season. And so if we lose 10, 20% of our meals and rooms tax, we don't just lose that for the duration of the crisis. You lose that forever. And that's what we're really nervous about. What our business community looks like in 3 to 12 months. And that's why we have this economic recovery package out there right now.
As I'm sure you know, earlier this week there was a report of an outbreak of corona cases down here in Manchester and the Londonderry area. And it came at a time when I think probably a lot of people were thinking the worst was over. That we had kind of weathered the storm from earlier this spring, and we're kind of on the way back. I know certainly around Manchester it seemed, and those towns seemed like businesses were starting to reopen again if they had been closed, or were rebounding to some degree. I guess how much do you feel the state is resilient enough to withstand, let's say, a second wave of this? I mean, we're seeing all these cases in some of the southern states and the Southwest, and I'm sure it's making a lot of people think, well, that could easily travel up here, and even despite the fairly good track record Vermont has had so far, the virus may not respect state boundaries. Is there going to be enough gas in the tank to kind of keep the show going? To mix metaphors?
I don't want to pretend I'm a health expert, so I can't opine on the likelihood of that happening, but I can say the Agency of Commerce has been involved with the restart process, and we have, as the governor says, turned the spigot slowly, right? We have not opened the spigot all the way. We've done quarter turns here, quarter turns there, and as you may have noticed, we're at a point now where we haven't turned again for a couple of weeks. We're at 50% occupancy for hotels. We're at 25% occupancy for gyms and hair salons and things along those lines. We're still, restricting capacity of events, all of these things. And the idea is we've put in place a reopening plan that doesn't allow things, or I should say, I can't say doesn't allow, that mitigates risk. We have more than 20 mandatory health and safety things that every business and employer need to do when they reopen. And then in addition to that, We have sector-specific guidance for farmers markets, retailers, summer camps, colleges. You go down this long list, and all of these things are meant to mitigate risk and reduce the likelihood of spread, reduce the likelihood of contact, all informed by health experts. So when you say, what does August look like? What does September look like? What does October look like? I don't know the answer to that, but we've been really conscious and conscientious about how we're reopening in hopes that we don't need to turn the spigot backwards. Because if you reopen the right way and you keep people mitigating that risk, our hope is that we don't need to shut down the way we had to shut down in March. March 15th, people weren't socially distanced from one another. They weren't wearing masks. They weren't changing the way they did business. If you've been into a restaurant lately, you see a lot of plexiglass. You see really innovative takeout and curbside delivery methods. All these things mitigate the risk. I'm hopeful that, and the Department of Health and others have told us, when we have these outbreaks, which we're going to have, people are going to get COVID, right? That we have the systems in place now to contain it. We have the systems in place now to prevent those from becoming widespread. Now, obviously, nationwide, when you look at the numbers, there comes a point where there are more cases than you can control. And I don't know if Vermont will end up there or not, but I certainly hope that we've put measures in place that can mitigate the chances of that happening.
What vulnerabilities to the state economy have been most starkly revealed to you and members of your agency? Is the broadband question, or is it something else that, a pandemic type situation really exposes the weak spots? And I guess I just wondered if there was anything that kind of leapt to the forefront of your mind as to say, well, once we get past this and things are kind of back to quote unquote normal, we need to look at strengthening X to avoid a situation like this in the future.
I think that the hardest reality has been the fragile nature of our hospitality sector. The hospitality sector has been the hardest hit by COVID-19, and that they haven't been able to really restart. They were some of the first to close. And it turns out, despite what you think about these institutions in our communities, these names that define some communities, these names that define the sense of community in some of these places and restaurants and such, they're really fragile. And there's a chance they're not going to make it through this crisis. And that's why we're doing everything we can to provide them resources that they need to. When you look at kind of the social or community issues, our downtowns have always been fragile given the nation's development patterns and where things are going. We have been on a 3 decades long effort to reverse that and make Vermont unique. I worry about the future of our downtowns in this crisis. Experiential downtowns require people to experience them in person. I think we all really worry about what the future of that looks like. And then when it comes to Vermont being a livable and attractive place for all sorts of entrepreneurs and creatives and families from around the world, obviously the lack of available broadband scares us. The governor proposed an aggressive plan to use some of the federal funding to address immediate needs in broadband, but the larger broadband picture is going to take years of effort and years of creative solutions, and not one solution, in my opinion. It takes dozens of communities forming communications districts, the private sector being creative, the private sector working with the public sector, working with these community groups. It's going to take a lot of work to solve that problem.
You mentioned the downtowns there a moment ago, and I remember I think hearing you talk down at Bennington College a couple of years ago about downtown issues then, two or so years ago, and that seemed like a big problem at the time, and I'm sure it's just been exacerbated by what we've had in the last 4 or 5 months. But um, as you talk to mayors and town managers and town officials of one sort or another, I mean, are they concerned that if things were kind of a little weak to start with, that people will not return to downtowns and go shopping or do whatever else the folks used to do there, go out to restaurants? I mean, is that just sort of going to be a real hard thing to kind of recover from?
Definitely concerned, but everybody I speak to in Vermont is bullish on our downtowns and believes that we can work together and turn this back around. And we had multiple decades worth of progress, and we're not going to let a pandemic stop that progress. But I do think it makes it harder. It makes it harder when people aren't going out. It makes it harder when you have 6 months to a year's worth of interruption in progress. You look at something like the Putnam Block, something that we worked on collaboratively with the great work of the region, the town. What happens when we have a global economic downturn in the middle of that? We were at some of the best times economically that we've ever been at 4 months ago, and we still were struggling. What does it mean on an economic downturn? That's the question we have to ask ourselves, and how do we position our downtowns in a way that they can be the bright spot in that downturn? That's the kind of stuff we're worried about. It's hard to know what the future will look like. It's wonderful to think that when the pandemic passes, people are back to work and our economy picks up where it was in February. But it's too soon to see. Too soon.
So it's too early to tell if we're going to have a V-shaped recovery where we'll just sort of pop back to, as you say, where things were at the beginning of the year and pick up where we left off. I was wondering, at another point, and I know this has been a concern at the state level as well, but with municipalities seeing businesses unable to pay sales and use taxes as well as other local taxes, are municipalities, do you think, going to struggle to kind of hold the line on their own budgets and pay their way through? I mean, I know at the state level, that's been something I've heard discussed frequently. How will the state, pay for various budget gaps like the education fund, for one? That seems to be mentioned a lot. But are municipalities also coming to you and your agency saying, hey, this isn't going to be so easy to kind of get back to square one here?
Yeah, the municipalities haven't felt the full effects of this yet, just because of the way most tax schedules work and when people pay taxes. And so I think there's enormous anxiety about what does the fall look like for a municipal budget. And we don't know for sure. They're very nervous. They're sharing that with us. The legislature included, I think, $16 million in emergency aid to municipalities. We look at utility arrearages when it looks like water and wastewater, utility arrearages when people haven't paid their water or wastewater systems. All of these things add up, right? Never mind property taxes. And the legislature and the governor work together to create some interim fixes or interim measures for towns, paying interest, for example, on loans that they have to take, municipalities have to take to pay certain government payments, creating this grant program. But it's still, I think everybody wants to know what the full impact is, and we don't know yet. But we're bracing. We're bracing for the reality that if the state coffers are going to take a hit, it would make sense the municipal coffers are going to take a hit, and so on. That goes back to my original thing. The best way to fix that is to make sure that we have people paying taxes. And that's by making sure our businesses continue to employ people, making sure our businesses exist and make it through this. We talked about the $150 million that's available to any business that has a 50% or greater loss in a single month. The businesses have to have at least one non-owner employee to be eligible for that $150 million. But there are other programs too, and if you'll indulge me here, Andrew, I just want to make sure people know this. You know, the Department of Health, the Agency of Human Services, just announced a $275 million healthcare stabilization program. So there's 6,000 healthcare providers in the state of Vermont. Most of those are independent businesses. You know, most of these doctors are businessmen and women, just like the dry cleaner down the street. They have to make a bottom line. They've been struggling too. Think about whether you've wanted to go to the doctor for the last 3 or 4 months. Their revenue's down. So this $275 million application should be available shortly. And those 6,000 providers, everybody from your hospital to your health clinic to your chiropractor, are eligible to apply for grants through that program. Another program, the Agency of Agriculture is running a dairy stabilization program for both dairy producers and for dairy processors. There's about $30 million available for dairy producers. Forestry businesses have about $5 million available to forestry businesses to help them through this. So there are other pots of money, daycare and childcare providers. There's a $12 million pot of funding available to them. All of these things exist because we all recognize that if we don't keep these enterprises alive, we'll never be able to make our budgets when it comes to balancing the bottom line.
One bright spot in the picture seems to be the real estate market and the whole. And I guess I'd be interested to hear your comments on that, and also a big question that seemed to be occupying a lot of folks up until this year, the population of Vermont, particularly our demographics. I mean, it was a big discussion point that Vermont seemed to be have a stagnant population, was an aging population. Young people were leaving the state to work in cities and urban areas. And of course, that's part of a nationwide trend, I guess. Vermont's not the only rural state. I'm sure probably folks in Nebraska and Iowa probably are wringing their hands over the same question. But I guess I just wondered, if certainly down here in the southern part of the state, we're seeing a tremendous rush of property sales, homes being snapped up, even land sales, which were kind of struggling for a while because construction costs were considered to be too high to make it worthwhile to build stuff. At least on the residential side of things. The commercial side is a little less clear, but is that sort of a ray of hope that, well, one of the, I won't call it a silver lining, but one of the potential things on the positive side would be that a place like Vermont will seem like a far more attractive place to live than, let's say, a major urban area. And we may see an upsurge in the population that we were all concerned about a year or so ago at this time.
Yeah, the future will tell us how real the rural, or I guess urban exodus is, and we see anecdotal evidence of it right now. I don't have any hard evidence that says home sales are up and they're being fueled by people moving north out of the cities. But we're certainly hearing anecdotal evidence, and it would make sense, right? Vermont is one of the safest states in the nation when it comes to our public health stance. And we've got great schools. We've got this great outdoor economy. We've got this great quality of life. The politics, generally mirror an urban area, so people feel comfortable there. Feel comfortable that their ideology is not offended. I mean, Vermont is the perfect place for urban refugees to find a safe place. And in addition to that, we need it. We need a more diverse population. We need more residents. We need growth. We need more taxpayers. So it would be wonderful. I don't want to pretend like we know for sure this is happening, but we understand why it could, and we also have seen historical patterns that suggest it does happen every so many years. You have an urban exodus. The last 15 years have been tough on rural America. And you mentioned a place like Iowa. Iowa has something going for it. It has urban areas. And so when you look at a place like Des Moines, they're having a better time of it than some of our rural areas were, and Vermont was, and part of that's fueled by immigration and by non-white Americans, which we just need more of in Vermont. So let's hope that materializes. It would be a wonderful little silver lining of this crisis, and we welcome anybody and everybody who's interested in coming to make Vermont their home. Just make sure you quarantine.
Right, 2 weeks, right? Well, that's about all I had. But I just wondered, was there anything else on the whole recovery grant side that you just want to make sure that people know the window is still open? The criteria I know are pretty clearly spelled out on your agency's website, accd.vermont.gov, and I guess, and they could also go to the tax department's website as well. But it sounded like the process went fairly smoothly the first couple of days. That's what I kept on hearing from people that had submitted applications, was that the portal was really well designed and kind of seamless, no big hiccups, and anybody could navigate it.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. We're quite proud that the system held up to the demand. We know there are some entrepreneurs that didn't qualify, that couldn't meet the thresholds, that didn't have non-owner employees. And we know that we're not done trying to help them, because it's not that we don't want to help them or we don't think they need help. It's that we only had a limited amount of money. We asked for more than $250 million in economic recovery dollars for businesses. The legislature gave us about $150 million. So we were not able to run the programs we had originally proposed. The programs we originally proposed, which would have helped sole proprietors and others, were not authorized. And we think that the demand will demonstrate when the legislature comes back in August, that we'll have a cooperative approach to saying, hey, here are all the things that we noticed when we ran this program. There are still a lot of people in need. Here are the things that we would need to change to help those people. And that's our plan, to have that conversation when the legislature comes back. There is one pot of funding we didn't talk about, and I wanted to just mention it. If you're a landlord or a tenant, but really if you're a landlord who has been suffering through the non-payment of rent for the last 3 months, as you know, the legislature and governor passed a moratorium on evictions. So it doesn't allow somebody to be kicked out of their home right now because of the economic crisis. It's not their fault that they can't make rent. However, when you have 3 or 4 months when you're not paying a landlord, eventually that landlord will be foreclosed on or find him or herself in a very uncomfortable position. So we created this pot of funding that alleviates two things. It takes the responsibility of paying that rent off the economically harmed household. So if you're not able to make rent for 3 or 4 months, can you imagine in another month or two when you have to start paying rent again and you're suddenly faced with 3 or 4 months of back rent that you owe to? This will eliminate that, so that your landlord will receive funding for your payment for your back due rent. And so that program just launched. It's being administered by the Vermont State Housing Authority. And I'd encourage people to check out the Vermont State Housing Authority website. Also, if you're a low-income Vermonter struggling to pay their mortgage right now, we stood up a mortgage arrearage program also at the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And so again, low-income Vermonters, moderate-income Vermonters who are struggling to pay their mortgage, please check out the Vermont Housing Finance Agency's website too.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for today, but I want to thank you again, Mr. Brady, for taking the time to share all that with us, and good luck up there. And hopefully we're closer to the end than we are to the beginning.
Amen. Thank you so much, Andrew. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you.